Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Napoleon Bonaparte, Part 8, Defeat at Leipzig, Saxony, Abdication, Exile on Elba, and Return to Power. Stopped last time in 1813. Napoleon had lost 500,000 men in Russia, something he could never recover from. But he didn't give up, and he raised a new army, but they were young and inexperienced, and he lacked supplies and artillery. So the Allied armies knew they could defeat Napoleon. In 1813, at the Battle of Dresden, Napoleon was ill and vomiting. He had diarrhea. In Paris, his wife Marie-Louise was in charge of a new draft, raising 280,000 men. There was public opposition. On October 6th, Bavaria joined the Allies against France. The British invaded France from Spain. Napoleon was outnumbered. The Battle of Leipzig, Saxony was also known as the Battle of the Nations. 500,000 men were involved. It was the largest battle in European history to that point. The Battle of Leipzig, there were French, Germans on both sides, Russians, Swedes, Italians, Poles, and every nation of the Austrian Empire. It was fought over 3 days from October 16th to the 18th. After the battle, Napoleon was sweating and disturbed. The French made a chaotic retreat. They were defeated, routed. 20,000 French soldiers were captured. The French army lacked food. At Dubin Heath, a Saxon castle, the generals visited Napoleon and advised him to retreat. He was depressed. Again, the Battle of the Nations. Napoleon had 180,000 men against 300,000 allies and was defeated. Poland, Spain, and Holland could be independent. He was sick. After the defeat at Leipzig, the philosopher Goethe was losing faith that Napoleon was invincible. The Battle of Leipzig, there were 47,000 French troops who died or were wounded. It was the worst defeat of his career. There were desertions. The new French army went from 200,000 men to 80,000 men. Napoleon had 120,000 besieged men in the fortresses on the Elba, Oder, and Vistula rivers. Most of those fortresses fell by late 1813, often as a result of starvation. By 1814, most men were prisoners of war. Napoleon arrived in Paris November 9th. There was an emergency draft for 300,000 more men, but Napoleon only got 120,000 men. The public was against the draft. In negotiations, Napoleon agreed that France would return to its natural boundaries, the Alps and Pyrenees Mountains, the Rhine River, and the Ardennes. They needed to abandon Italy, Germany, Spain, and Holland, and part of Belgium. Pensions of government salaries were suspended because of lack of money. The French people wanted peace. The British would not accept the French in Belgium. The British wanted Napoleon to give up the throne, and the Allied invasion of France happened. Napoleon was ready to fight more. January of 1814, the Allied troops were 950,000 men. The French had 220,000 men. The French people wanted peace. There were anti-draft riots and resentment over higher taxes. On January 16th, Napoleon wrote a letter to Metternich, the Austrian ambassador. On January 21st, the Pope was released from Fontainebleau and allowed to return to the Vatican. General Murat betrayed and defected to Austria with 30,000 men. Murat signed a truce with England and an alliance with Austria. Everything was crashing around Napoleon. He was in despair and depressed. His overthrow was at hand. When he was told the Bourbons would return, he fell asleep. The Russian Tsar wanted vengeance for Moscow, and he wanted to blow up the Tuileries. The Allies offered that France could retain its natural frontiers, the Rhine River and the Alps and the Pyrenees. Blücher crossed the Rhine River. The French armies had long been called liberators. Now the invaders of France were called liberators. The anti-French coalition was strong. The French were tired of war. Napoleon's spirits rose. He wanted to fight. He entrusted Paris to Joseph, who betrayed him. Blücher achieved victory against Napoleon at Brienne. Napoleon decided to make peace, then changed his mind and wanted to fight. He hated the thought that his son would grow up to be an Austrian prince. The Tsar wanted Paris ruled under a Russian general. Again, Napoleon wanted to fight. His soldiers wanted to fight, but the officers revolted and would not fight. The English were in Bordeaux, and the Bourbon flag was raised there. Napoleon left Paris January 23rd to return to the war. He never saw his wife and son again. It was the harshest winter in Europe in 160 years. There was an outbreak of typhus in the French army. The French people were experiencing national demoralization. The French towns and cities were surrendering to small Allied units. On March 1st, the Allies signed the Treaty of Chaumont, agreeing to make no separate peace with Napoleon. On March 10th, Talleyrand arrived at Tsar Alexander's headquarters and told him that the Paris siege preparations were poor. He advised a march straight to Paris. Talleyrand had defected. It had been 5 years since Napoleon called him, quote, a shit in silk stockings. In the 1814 campaign, Napoleon traveled 1,000 miles, slept in 48 different places over 65 days. The Allied armies were converging on Paris. Napoleon needed to get to Paris. On March 30th, Paris surrendered before Napoleon could come. The people of Paris welcomed the Allied armies and cried, Vive l'Empereur Alexander! Talleyrand established a new government. King Louis XVIII would be restored to the throne. Napoleon was at Fontainebleau. He was being pressured to abdicate. General Marmont's corps capitulated. Paris fell to the enemy. The Tsar was in Paris and met Talleyrand, the traitor. The French Senate voted that Napoleon must abdicate, and he agreed. The Italian island of Elba was chosen, off the northwestern coast of Italy, near Corsica, for Napoleon to live. He would be the Emperor of Elba, with an income of 2 million francs. The Russian Tsar visited Josephine. Her daughter Hortense came to Napoleon at Fontainebleau. Countess Waluska also visited, but was not recognized, left a letter, and left. Napoleon said, quote, true heroism consists of being superior to the ills of life, in whatever shape they may challenge to the combat. He was offered to rule the island of Elba off the coast of Italy if he abdicated, and he agreed. Many declared their loyalty to Louis XVIII. Louis XVIII, from the Bourbon family, was in England, preparing to return to France. Many in the army were loyal to Napoleon. He could have started a civil war, but chose not to. Marie Louise and Napoleon II went to Vienna under pressure. 600 imperial guardsmen came with Napoleon to Elba. He told his valet Constant, quote, we will go plant cabbages. Napoleon was irritated by the news that Tsar Alexander had visited Marie Louise at Rambouillet. He left Fontainebleau for Elba on April 20th. He was sad to be separated from his wife and son, and said, quote, I have been wrong maybe in my plans. I have done harm in war, but it is all like a dream. He wrote a letter to Countess Waluska. He traveled to the Mediterranean coast for the trip to Elba and spoke to the old guard. He thanked them. He spoke of honor and glory and wished them well. The men cried, Vive l'Empereur! When he departed, the men cried. The train of carriages drove through Provence. An angry mob attacked them and said, down with the tyrant, kill the wretch. They were angry with Napoleon, especially for all the dead from the Russian campaign. Kill the murderer. Napoleon had to adopt a disguise. He had an Austrian uniform, a Prussian cap, and a Russian cloak. He departed Fontainebleau for Elba. As we said, he addressed the ranks of the grognards and thanked them for their noble service. He said his aim in life had been the happiness and glory of France. The officers and men wept. He arrived at Fréjus on the coast on April 22nd. It was a dangerous trip. Stones were thrown at the carriages. The frigate HMS Undaunted came to take him to Elba. His sister Pauline met him there. So they made the trip to Elba. in which Corsica is visible, his childhood home, and he became the ruler of Elba. He was welcomed by the peasants and petty burghers. Napoleon inspected the fortifications. He had an army of 1,000 men on Elba. He worked to improve the life of the people of Elba with mulberry and silkworm production. He was in good spirits and health on Elba, very energetic, and he worked for the welfare of the people there. May 3rd, he arrived at Elba, the main harbor of Porto Ferrao, and was welcomed by the officials and the public, who cried, "Viva l'Empereur!" Napoleon stayed in the Palazzina dei Mulini. He inspected the iron mines. He was energetic about every aspect of life on Elba and had a pet monkey named Jenar. He walked the coastline goat paths and cultivated mulberry trees. He built a hospital on Elba. He planted vineyards and paved the streets. He paid attention to the tiniest detail on Elba. On May 29th, Josephine died of pneumonia at Malmaison at age 50. 5 days earlier, Tsar Alexander had visited her. Napoleon declared 2 days of mourning on Elba for his first wife, Josephine, and said, quote, "Ah, she is happy now." Napoleon's mother arrived in August. His identity was that of a soldier. He enjoyed the Italian language on Elba. Napoleon relaxed, he rested, and was content. His mother Letizia came, and they were happy together, the mother and son. Letizia brought some money. His sister Pauline came. There was no word from his brothers. Josephine had died. Countess Waluska came. They spent 2 happy days together, but he sent her away. He did not want an excuse for Marie-Louise to not come. On September 1st, Marie Waluska arrived with their son Alexander, only stayed 2 days because she was not his wife. It was very sad that he sent away this woman who loved him and whom he loved for his wife who would never come. On September 15th, the great powers met at the Congress of Vienna, organized by Metternich and Talleyrand, redrawing the map of Europe. Napoleon watched the errors of the Bourbons made after Louis XVIII returned to the throne. The remains of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were disinterred and reinterred with pomp at the Abbey of St. Denis. Wellington was the new British ambassador to France. On August 15th, in defiance of orders, many in the army openly celebrated Napoleon's birthday with cannon fire salutes and cries of "Viva l'Empereur!" The Austrian Emperor Francis refused to allow his daughter, Napoleon's wife, Marie-Louise, and his son, Napoleon II, to join him on Elba. A British visitor named John McNamara came and spent 2 hours on January 1st, 1815, with Napoleon, and told him, quote, "History as a triumvirate of great men, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Napoleon Bonaparte." Napoleon's eyes moistened. That had been his desire since childhood, to be compared favorably to those 2 heroes of his from history. Marie-Louise and Napoleon II did not come. Napoleon II was 4 years old and was not allowed to speak his father's name. His mother's secretary left Vienna at one point, and the boy told him, quote, "Tell my father I love him tremendously." Napoleon wept looking at his son's portrait and asked the eternal question, what is Paris saying? In other words, the political climate of Paris. With the return of the Bourbon family, King Louis on the throne was on the throne in Paris. He was very fat, could hardly walk. It was the return of the power of the nobility, the old order. The people realized Napoleon's efforts. Wellington was the new British ambassador. People were angry when the schools for the orphans from the members of the Legion of Honor was closed. There was disillusionment. However, Napoleon was unbroken. The army was devoted to him, and the Bourbons were faint hearts. February of 1815, Napoleon decided to return to France. He took the ship L'Inconstant. He had been reading a biography of Charles V of Austria. On February 26, he left Elba with 1,142 men. By March 1st, they arrived at Gulf Juan on the southern French coast. They took the Alpine route to the arsenal at Grenoble, avoiding the Royalist region. So he said he decided to return to Paris and departed with 7 frigates and 1,000 men. He took the route to Paris through the French Alps and received a popular reception. The people supported him. King Louis had tried to return the nobles' lands in the Alps which had been confiscated. Their return was unpopular. There was an order to exterminate Napoleon and, quote, his band of brigands. At Grenoble, Napoleon approached the army of the 5th Corps with an appeal, which succeeded. The men cried, "Vive l'Empereur!" Napoleon arrived at Gap, France. The peasants took out their 5-piece franc coins, which had the profile of Napoleon, and said, quote, "It is he." The most dramatic moment on the journey came in Laffrey, an encounter with the battalion of the 5th Line. He was outnumbered. Napoleon spoke to them. He had charisma. The troops threw down their muskets and mobbed him, their emperor. He spoke to one soldier and said, "What, you old rascal? Were you about to fire on your emperor?" And the soldier showed him that the musket was not loaded. When he returned to power, this famous time, returned from Elba, "Here I am, kill your emperor if you wish." And the response, "Long live the emperor." Laffrey was the first time regular troops came over to his side. By March 7th, Napoleon arrived at Grenoble. At Lyon, he stayed at the Archbishop's palace. News of Napoleon's return reached Paris on March 5th. The journey continued. Large, enthusiastic crowds greeted him and his men. March 14th, General Ney defected to Napoleon because of overwhelming support among his men for Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon won over the troops at Grenoble. Then in Lyon, he asked where Marshal Ney was. Ney was still with the king and had vowed to destroy Napoleon. Then Ney switched sides to the emperor, and Napoleon forgave him and said he loved Ney. He said he wanted peace, and he wanted to rule only France. Napoleon was happy. The road to Paris was open. King Louis fled. The army captured Louis and seized his silver, but allowed Louis to escape to the seaport and return to England. Napoleon had left Paris 13 months before. He called the march to Paris the most splendid experience of his life. Napoleon's wife Marie-Louise was in Vienna and refused to come to Paris. She was rejecting him, her husband. He wanted his wife and son to come. He wanted to give power to his son. On March 20th, he arrived at Fontainebleau. It had been 11 months since he left. King Louis XVIII fled. Napoleon was in Paris March 20th, his son's 4th birthday. The courtyard of the Tuileries was packed. It was bedlam, magic, the return of Napoleon Bonaparte. On March 21st, Napoleon reconstituted the government. The Allies would not accept him on the throne of France, and Napoleon prepared for an invasion of France. His wife Marie-Louise remained in Austria in hope that her husband would be defeated in the coming war. General Rapp joined Napoleon. He had been given a command with the Bourbons. Napoleon said, quote, "What, you rogue, you wanted to kill me?" Napoleon tried to be hard on Rapp, but Rapp said that with Napoleon, quote, "kind feelings always gained the ascendancy." Napoleon agreed to freedom of speech in the press and that he was dedicated to the welfare of the people of France. News came from Vienna that war was declared on Napoleon and France by England, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. During this time, Napoleon took many hot baths. He slept a lot. He was losing his self-confidence. He was hurt by the rejection of his wife, Marie-Louise. However, he continued his hard work ethic. During the 3 months from his return till his final defeat at Waterloo, Belgium, he wrote 900 letters. France was in financial distress. Napoleon needed a quick military victory and could not afford a long war. The French people sensed disaster. There was no public support for war. By mid-April, Marie-Louise and Napoleon II had not come, but war was coming. May 15th, the Allies declared war on France. Napoleon was gloomy and depressed, yet calm. On June 1st was the Acre Additional, a gigantic open-air ritual at the Champ de Mai, a mixture of a religious, political, and military ceremony based on Charlemagne's traditions. Napoleon spoke and said he owed everything to the people. He spoke of glory, honor, and happiness, and there was prolonged cheering for Emperor Napoleon. He wanted to know about his son, Napoleon II, and got some news. He did not want war, but war was forced on him. His final defeat was coming. In the spring in Paris, the crowds came to the Champ de Mai for this folk assembly. He took an oath to the new constitution and went to war. His clothes at the folk assembly, were white silk and a hat with ostrich plumes. He was forlorn without his wife and son. Hortense, Josephine's daughter, replaced the missing Marie-Louise at that event. The next day, Napoleon departed for his last war against England, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, 4 countries who all imitated his war tactics. His last victory was achieved at Ligny against the Prussians. He was growing old and his mythical energy was subsiding. On June 12th, he left the Elysee to join the Army of the North at Avesnes. He dined with General Ney. He believed that if he could achieve victory against the English in Belgium, it would produce a change of administration in England and a chance for peace. 280,000 French soldiers faced 800,000 Allied troops. Napoleon was 46 years old, overweight, and his energy was less than he had when he was young. June 18th was his final defeat at Waterloo, Belgium. The French army disintegrated into disorder. They were defeated and fled in all directions. Napoleon said, quote, "Come, General, the affair is over. We have lost the day. Let us be off." He was exhausted, almost fell asleep on his horse and fell off his horse. Napoleon said, quote, "Eh bien, monsieur, we have done a fine thing." Waterloo was the second costly single-day battle in the Napoleonic Wars after Borodino. 25,000 to 30,000 French soldiers were killed and wounded. Napoleon was ready to continue the war and said, quote, "All is not lost." In a letter to his brother Joseph, he continued, quote, "The people must help me and not deafen me with advice." He was determined and energetic. Seeking political support, he returned to Paris. The Rothschilds had courier pigeons, the Rothschild banking family, for rapid communication. They received news of Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo early. They sold their holdings. People thought that the British had lost at Waterloo and there was panic selling. The market dropped and the Rothschild bought up property at low prices and increased their fortune by a factor of 20. The Napoleonic Wars were very profitable to the Rothschild family. They lent money to governments on both sides. They funded both sides of the war. Jacob Rothschild in Paris funded Napoleon. Nathan Rothschild in London financed the British in Wellington. Napoleon had been kind to the Jewish people. However, Rothschilds played an important role in his defeat. The French were angry at the Rothschilds, and this fueled anti-Semitism. Nathan Rothschild said, quote, "The man who controls the Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England." The Prussian army played a major role in the defeat of the French at Waterloo. The French army was routed. The question came, what is Paris saying? Napoleon returned to Paris. The Chamber of Deputies refused to support more war. Lafayette said that the French wanted peace. Napoleon departed. He said he wanted his son to succeed him. The chamber refused, so he left. He went to Malmaison. His mother, Hortense, Lucien, and Joseph all came. Napoleon lacked political and public support. Lafayette took power. He was accused of treachery, but denied it. He said the French people had followed Napoleon to the sands of Africa, the deserts of Russia, and that the bones of Frenchmen were scattered in every region, a witness to their fidelity. Napoleon decided to abdicate. He talked about living in America. He went to Malmaison. On June 26th, he saw Countess Waluska and said goodbye to her. July 2nd, he was in Rochefort on the coast. The British Royal Navy was there, and Napoleon decided to surrender to the British. He believed he would be well treated in England. He believed he would be a guest and not a prisoner in England. He compared himself to Themistocles, the ancient Greek who went to live in Persia, the enemy of the Greeks. On July 15th, he boarded the British ship Bellerophon. The French government wanted Napoleon to leave. Napoleon, as we said, traveled to Rochefort on the coast. Where should he go? The United States? The sea escape was blocked by English ships. Napoleon decided to throw himself on the hospitality of the British people. The English cruiser Bellerophon was there. He sent a message and boarded the English vessel and sailed to Plymouth, England. The Napoleonic Wars were over. Napoleon won over everyone on board with his charisma. He said that if not for the English, Napoleon would have been Emperor of the East. The British decided that they would not allow him to live in England and he would be sent to St. Helena as a prisoner. On July 23rd, he saw France for the last time and arrived at Torbay on the English coast on July 24th. Large crowd came. He went on deck to get fresh air, and thousands removed their hats out of respect. He was given a paper. It said that St. Helena was to be his new home, an island in the South Atlantic Ocean. He was angry but accepted it and was stoic. A new ship, the Northumberland, would sail to St. Helena with him. He was an object of curiosity for sightseers. On July 27th, he arrived at Plymouth. 1,000 pleasure boats surrounded the ship. On July 31st, the British told Napoleon that he would go to St. Helena. He was angry. On August 7th, he was transferred to the ship the Northumberland under the command of Rear Admiral George Cockburn, who had been involved in the burning of Washington, D.C. in 1814, the War of 1812 between the United States and Great Britain. It was a 4,400-mile journey to St. Helena. 26 people came with him. On the trip, Napoleon played vingt et un with British officers. He had a good appetite, praised the food, and was resigned to his fate. He was charming. It was a 10-week voyage. Napoleon would arise at 10 in the morning and have meat and wine for breakfast, then dress at 3 p.m. He did not eat vegetables. He would walk the deck for 90 minutes and play cards from 8 to 10 p.m. and then go to bed. Admiral Cockburn altered the route. Napoleon wanted to see the peak at Tenerife in the Canary Islands. When they crossed the equator, he threw in 100 Napoleon coins in the ocean to mark that event. On October 14th, they arrived at St. Helena, which was 85 square miles, 28 miles in circumference, 1,150 miles from Angola in Western Africa, 2,000 miles from Brazil in South America, the most remote place in the world, a population in 1815 of 3,400 Europeans, 220 black slaves, 490 Chinese, and 116 Malays. Well, that concludes today's presentation. We'll continue next time with the fascinating life of Napoleon Bonaparte. You might consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.